Good morning, everyone. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be with you today. It is my prayer and my hope that the things we have to discuss this morning will be beneficial, will be edifying to you, and will bring you closer to the Lord. I got to say, Matt, I don't mind being called Nelson. Maybe it's the suit. I don't usually wear a suit. But hopefully, because I'm wearing a suit, you'll think that I know what I'm talking about today. Because they don't just let anybody go in and just go buy a suit, right? They only let people that make sure they know what they're talking about buy one. So hopefully, you will think I'm competent today. We're going to talk about the vanity of wisdom. And this is a study that comes out of Ecclesiastes. And this is a study that Caleb and I will be working together on. Caleb Austin is going to be helping me with this. And so today we're going to start this off. Ecclesiastes is a book that has always confused me. I'll admit. I've used verses from it in sermons. It's easy sometimes, kind of like Proverbs. It's easy sometimes in studies just to go pull a verse out and look at it and use it to prove your point, and then you move on. And there's been times I've done that, and I keep reading in Ecclesiastes, and I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. What on earth is going on here? And I'm an IT guy, and I'm a man, so you know that at home I have a box full of cords that are all tangled up. And I'm always like, one of these days I'm going to go through those cords and sort out what cords I need and get rid of the ones I don't and keep the ones I do, and it'll all be organized. My wife is really hoping I get to that very soon. Maybe in the next 6 months. We'll see. Ecclesiastes has always been that to me. All these random cords just kind of thrown in this box, and it didn't make much sense to me. And I've always been like, one of these days, I'm going to put my good eye on that and go through and figure it out. And so I've spent time in Ecclesiastes, reading commentaries, reading books, and a lot of this has started to be sorted out for me, and I'd like to share some of those things with you today. I think it is actually very relevant for our time, and I think you'll see that as we go. To start off, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on some of this technical information, but it is important that we go through it to get set up for the things we're going to talk about. Let's talk about the point of the book of Ecclesiastes. And this is something that I have changed my mind on and realized that I've been very wrong about Ecclesiastes. And I want to go through some of these things, and we'll go through this pretty quick because I don't want to spend too much time on this. But we need to understand what this book is trying to do and what the speakers in this book are trying to accomplish, where they're coming from. First of all, the basic structure of the book, we have a narrator. He introduces what is called the preacher, and he provides a basic commentary at the end. So the narrator comes at the beginning, the narrator finishes the book at the very end. He's got a couple of comments in the middle in chapter 7, but they're very brief. And one of the things that's always confused me about this book is it's introducing the preacher. A preacher is somebody we're supposed to listen to, right? My understanding is that this word preacher here is the Hebrew word kohelet, which actually is probably better translated as compiler, somebody who is compiling wisdom. So he's not the preacher in the pulpit with his suit on that we are necessarily supposed to hang on every word he says, and you'll see that as we go. So the narrator introduces this preacher, and most of the book is this preacher's comments, this compiler's comments, and they are composed of two main sections. Chapters 1 through 9, this compiler or preacher, he's adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things. So he is going through his observations of life, and he's trying to figure out what this life is all about. What does it all mean? What it is all for, and how should I react to that? And then chapters 10 through 12, he puts together a collection of proverbs that try to take all these threads of concepts, and he's trying to make sense out of them. And so if you read chapters 10 through 12, there's kind of a note of resolution here, but if you really get into the proverb, they don't actually really solve anything. He never quite figures it out. And so our narrator will come in at the end and give us the conclusion of the matter. Let's talk for a minute about the narrator's viewpoint. As we said, he introduces this preacher, and he summarizes his point. And we'll see that here in a minute. And the preacher's point is vanity of vanity. Everything is vanity, a waste of time. And we'll talk about what that means more here in just a moment. And then his conclusion is a warning. He's giving us a warning and an opposing point to the point that this preacher is making, and we'll see that. So let's just look, and this isn't even the whole beginning of what the narrator says, but it's most of it. So this is the narrator speaking in Ecclesiastes 1, verses 1 through 7. The words of the preacher, the son of David. So he's introducing him. I guess he's the MC. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. And he'll go on to finish out these comments, talking about how there's nothing new under the sun. So the narrator is telling us the preacher's point. The preacher is saying everything is a waste. It's vanity. That's what he means here. And he elaborates by using these metaphors. Now, these are not scientific statements about how the world works. These are metaphors to illustrate what he means by vanity. And so his illustrations are a generation goes, a generation comes, the earth remains forever. He talks about the sun rising. It goes down, it comes back up. It goes down, it comes back up. And nothing ever changes. It's always a day. The sun's always going down, the sun's always coming up. It's always the same. He says the wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around it goes. It's always going, and it comes back. It's going, and it's back. It's gone, and it's back. The wind blows, and nothing ever changes. That wind is always going. It's just a thing that never changes. Verse 7, he says, all streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. So that raging river, tons of water is going into the ocean, but the ocean never gets any fuller. And that's what he means by vanity. That figuring out these things, finding this meaning to life, is just like this river. It's vanity. You're not going to change anything. You're not going to make a difference in the world. You're going to die, and the world is just going to keep going on. So that's what the narrator is telling us that this preacher's point is. And then at the end of the book, Ecclesiastes 12, verses 9 through 14, our narrator comes back in and tells us his viewpoint of this idea of vanity of vanities. So talking about the preacher, he says, besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Now I want to discuss this conclusion here for just a minute. So he tells us, the preacher, he's teaching people. He collected these proverbs in verses 10 or chapters 10, 11, 12. He said the preacher sought to find words of delight. Did you notice he didn't say he found words of delight? He sought words of delight. And the narrator acknowledges, he says, uprightly he wrote words of truth. Some of the things this preacher says are very true. You'll see that today. You'll be going along, you're like, well, that's not wrong. You know, he's got a point there. So he does write some things that are true, but then he gives us, the narrator gives us his own metaphor. He says, the words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. Now this is a verse that has led me to be confused about Ecclesiastes previously, because I read this, and I'm like, okay, the words of the wise are like goads. That's like those little burrs or stickers you get from walking in the yard. That sounds painful, like it hurts. Okay, maybe there's some painful truths in here that we have to address, and there are. Then he goes on, he says, like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. Well, this sounds like a good thing, right? Nails firmly fixed. These collected sayings, they're there for a point. They're holding something in place firmly fixed. And they are given by one shepherd. And it's capitalized on here because the ESV version I was using has that capitalized, and it's assumed that that shepherd is the Lord. What I learned is historically, shepherds would take a stick. If they didn't have one of those hook things, they would take a stick and they would get some of those large burrs and put on the end of it. And that's what they would use to prod the sheep along. And sometimes they would refer to those as nails. Those are the nails firmly fixed. And so the shepherd is not necessarily a metaphor for God here. The narrator is letting us know that the wisdom contained in what the preacher is teaching, there's some good things, there's some bad things, but they're going to lead you to some painful conclusions. And so then he gives us the warning, my son, beware of anything beyond these, of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. If I could put this in my own words, the preacher has lost the plot. And maybe you're thinking that today about me, I don't know. He's lost the plot. He spent so much time seeking out this wisdom, filling his head with all of these ideas, looking for wisdom in every corner, that he's missed the point. And so then the narrator tells us the truth. Fear God and keep his commandments. As we go through the rest of our talk today, I think you'll see that this is coming true, that these things play out, and that this is the proper view of how this book works. Some key terms that come up all the time throughout Ecclesiastes over and over is the term vanity. We've already discussed what that means, and the metaphors given for that. It's a striving or grasping after wind, sometimes he says in the book. This means things are pointless. They're going to change nothing in the long run. Another term that's used a lot is under the sun or under heaven. This means he is only basing his wisdom off of observations of this world. He is gathering wisdom apart from God. So the compiler or the preacher, his wisdom is based only on his observations of this world. Now the problem with that is that this is a fallen world. Things don't work here all the time the way that they're supposed to. It's a fallen world. So another thing you'll find in Ecclesiastes, and this is something that's always confused me, is that there are many, many contradictions of thought within Ecclesiastes. There will be recognitions that wisdom will bring you success, it'll bring you wealth, it'll be easier for you in the long run to have wisdom. But then at the same time, he talks about wisdom is vanity, vanity of vanities. Well, that's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? That doesn't make sense. That's cords tangled up. Righteousness has benefits. And yet he observes in the book that the unrighteous prosper. And at one point in the book he even says, and we'll have that verse on here today, that it's good not to be too righteous. That's not a very good point that he's making. It's good to enjoy the fruits of toil. So he says that there are several statements throughout Ecclesiastes about how good it is to at the end of the day, to enjoy the fruit of your labor and enjoy your life and the blessings that you have in it. But then he also talks about toil is pointless. It's vanity. It changes nothing. These are contradictions. God has given us work and meaning. But then he talks about how we can't actually know what that is because God is too far from us. So these are some of the contradictory themes that run through Ecclesiastes. So to conclude the point of the book of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes is a cautionary tale given by the narrator against trying to find purpose apart from God. The narrator of this book wants us to look at the preacher, and he is telling us, don't be like this guy. Don't be like him. True meaning can only be found in fearing God and keeping his commandments, and that's what he concludes with. And as we dig into a specific section of Ecclesiastes this morning, I think you'll see that this is true, and I think these concepts will begin to jump off the page for you. So let's get to our topic of the morning, the vanity of wisdom. Now this sounds like a contradiction, right? You know, I first set this up when I was MC the other day by saying we kind of are going to have Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and they're going to duke it out. Let's see how it turns out. So let's start in Proverbs. If you're reading through Proverbs, Proverbs has a lot to say about wisdom itself. Proverbs chapter 8, we have wisdom is personified as a woman, and she is giving this discourse about where she comes from. She's giving a discourse about the benefits that she brings and her interactions within the world. And she says in verses 32 through 36, "And now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who fails to find me injures himself, and all who hate me love death. You know, sounds to me, from what Proverbs is saying, if you gain wisdom, you're gaining a pretty good thing, and things are going to go very well for you. It even says you find life. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 16, how much better to get wisdom than gold. To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. Proverbs 24, verse 14, know that wisdom is such to your soul. He's talking about how delicious honey is and how wonderful it is on your tongue and to taste it, and that's what the writer is comparing wisdom to. Know that wisdom is such to your soul, like that delicious honey. If you find it, there will be a future, and your hope will not be cut off. So hope comes with wisdom. If you gain wisdom, your hope will grow. It will not be cut off. You'll have a future to look forward to. Man, this sounds great. Here comes the preacher. What does the preacher observe about wisdom? In verse 17 of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, he says, and I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. This is the opposite of what Proverbs would have us think, isn't it? So let's figure out which one is right. The preacher's point is that gaining wisdom is a vain effort. He says it's also vexation and sorrow. You're just going to frustrate yourself. If you try to gain wisdom, gain knowledge, and receive those blessings from Proverbs, you're just going to get frustrated. That's what that term vexation means. It's just going to frustrate you. It's not a worthwhile thing to seek after. Why? Why does the preacher think this? I mean, that seems pretty counterintuitive, right? Why would you conclude that wisdom is a vain effort? Throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, he makes several comments about wisdom. These putting one thing with another to figure out the meaning of things is what he's doing. And he has some reflections on wisdom, and we won't go through all of them, but there are enough here where we can start to see his viewpoint kind of coalesce. First of all, the preacher recognizes that death comes to all. Every one of us will die. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 13 and 17. Then I saw that there was more gain in wisdom than in folly. So he's recognizing wisdom can bring you more gain than folly can, or foolishness. As there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. So there's our recognition that, yeah, wisdom can bring you some benefits in life. It certainly can. And yet, I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. And I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. Seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after wind. So reason number one why he thinks wisdom is vanity, pursuing wisdom is vanity, is because whether or not you're very wise or whether you're very foolish, both of them end up the same, dead and in the grave. And I'm sure he's thinking, probably like I think, those fools out there, those foolish people committing all of this folly, it looks like they're having a good time, right? They're out there getting in the way of stuff and living the big life, and they're making foolish decisions one after another, but it sure looks like they're having a good time. So what's the point of living this wise, disciplined life if me and that fool are going to be right next to each other in the grave with no lasting legacy, no enduring remembrance? What's the point? Vanity of vanities. What's the point? And he even concludes, I hated life. It feels like wisdom is something we should pursue. It feels like it should be a good thing, but in the end, we're all dead. We're all the same. The grave is the great equalizer. So you can begin to see why the preacher thinks this way. You know, he kind of has a point, doesn't he? He says that wisdom is a wasted effort. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 15 through 16. In my vain life I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness. I have a typo on there where I repeated that phrase. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? If you're going to end up dead, if the fools are rewarded in this life, why on earth would you be too wise? It's a wasted effort. Why should you destroy yourself? Why put yourself through the discipline of looking for wisdom? Why make your life that difficult when the fool is just going to be rewarded in life just as well? The wicked man is going to be rewarded in life just as well. Why on earth would we put ourselves through that? And so the preacher thinks that wisdom is a vain effort. Yeah, he's kind of got a point. Look at Congress, right? We feel like there's a lot of fools in there that are doing very well. What's the point in pursuing wisdom and living a disciplined life? We see people all the time doing better than us in life, so it seems, more successful, that are wicked, evil, awful, rotten people. We see people that, it's like, I don't know if they have two brain cells in their head to rub together, but how are they so much further in life than I am? I don't know. And the preacher sees that same thing in his life. And so he concludes, well, probably not the greatest idea to put so much time and effort into pursuing wisdom, because you're going to be dead just like the fool, and the fool's going to get ahead sometimes too. It's a wasted effort. The preacher says that wisdom is too elusive. That's another reason why he thinks it's a vain effort. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, we have a couple of illustrations of this from what he says throughout the book. In chapter 7, verses 23 through 24, all this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? So as he progressed in his wisdom, as he got more and more wise, he found out that goal of wisdom was further off. And the closer he got to it, the further off it got. And so he concludes it's very, very deep. Who can find it? Who can even know what wisdom is? Who can say that they're wise? It's elusive. It's far from us. We can't actually achieve it. In chapter 8, verses 16 through 17, the preacher says, when I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. And so he takes this idea of wisdom and knowledge being this elusive thing that really you can't ever get to the bottom of it. And he applies that to toil. And we start to see this preacher's viewpoint about God himself come through. Because the preacher believes that God exists. He knows that he's there, and he knows that God should be revered. And he talks about it in the book of Ecclesiastes. But God is elusive. He's far from us. We can't actually know him. And that's what's reflected in this teaching here. God has given us work. He's given us things to be busy with, but we can't actually know what those are because God is so far from us. God's wisdom is so far from us. We can't actually get to the bottom of it. And there's a lot of wise people out there that claim to know, but really they don't. Those are just false claims. So if we can't ever actually get to the bottom of it, why try? If it's unachievable, why try to achieve it? It's vanity. The preacher also tells us that wisdom is outweighed by folly. And this passage is the last verse of chapter 9 and the first verse of chapter 10. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. Well, that sounds right. And he talks about in this about a wise person being equal to 10 men of strength. He talks about a city being protected by a wise man, even though an army came against it. But he says, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. You know, you can make all sorts of wise decisions in your life, but it's that one foolish decision that hurts the most, doesn't it? That's how I feel. How many times do you feel like you do good every day, and it's not rewarded? It's just kind of the normal. But man, you do one thing wrong, and everybody wants to let you know about it. One bad grade can bring your whole GPA down, even though you're making good grade after good grade. You can be very careful about the way that you drive. And you probably drive miles to and from work or wherever you go during the day, and you do this every day, thousands of days on end. But that one wreck, man, that can make a big difference. And so the preacher sees these things, and he says, wisdom is outweighed by folly. Wisdom is vanity because all it takes is a little bit of folly. It's like a fly in that ointment. Messes the whole thing up. He disagrees with the young Michael Jackson. One bad apple does spoil the whole bunch, he says. Do any of these ideas sound familiar to you? I thought, the Holy Spirit, in his wisdom, preserved these words for us today. There's actually a lot of similarities in things. So I started thinking, well, what sort of wisdom in our day and time reflects these ideas of the preacher? And first, have you ever heard of this? Because we're talking about vain wisdom, right? Wisdom that's pointless and doesn't mean anything. And the first thing that came to my head is what's called shower thoughts. Have you ever had a shower thought? Those are when you're taking a shower and the water's running and your mind just kind of starts to ponder the great burning questions of life. Like, if you stack 2 pizzas, you have 2 pizzas. If you stack 2 lasagnas, you still have only 1 lasagna. How does that work? I don't know. If James Bond is the most famous spy, wouldn't that make him the worst spy? Because everybody knows about him? Burning questions of life. The sinking of the Titanic must have been a miracle for the seafood in the kitchen. I bet that was their best day. Okay, maybe that was too soon for that one. During a nuclear explosion, there's a certain distance away from the blast where all the frozen pizzas at the store would be perfectly cooked. I hope I'm in that radius. That would be the nice one to be in. These are the things we think about during the shower. Everything that exists is either an octopus or not an octopus. Have you ever thought of that? We have 2 categories. We can boil everything down to being in one of these categories. It's either an octopus or it's not. That should simplify everything. The first person to say cool, he must have been cool because everyone started saying it after that. These are our vain things of wisdom, things we think about in the shower. Well, okay, there actually are some modes of thinking, some philosophies in our day that more accurately reflects the way the preacher thinks. I don't know if you've ever heard of this idea called nihilism. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot in sometimes political conversations, philosophical conversations. Nihilism, I find a lot of similarities with the philosophy of the preacher in Ecclesiastes. And we'll see some of those similarities here. Nihilism basically has 4 types, and they all kind of work together. These are basically 4 tenets of this philosophy. And this came around kind of in the mid to late 1800s, and it's been attributed to several people. One of the most famous people is Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm not an expert in this, but I'm familiar with some of these tenets. There's cosmic nihilism, which means the universe is unintelligible and hostile to humanity. The universe around you, it's just cold, heartless matter. It may not even be matter. It is whatever it is. It means nothing. It's there for nothing. It just is. It's not here for you to survive in. It just is. There it is. It's unintelligible and hostile to humanity. It's vanity, right? Epistemological. Now, this is a fancy word for things dealing with knowledge. Epistemology itself means how do we know what we know, is essentially what that means. And so epistemological nihilism says that knowledge does not exist, or if it does, it's not attainable by humans. Doesn't that sound familiar? That wisdom is deep, very deep. Existential nihilism. This tenet of nihilism says that life itself has no intrinsic meaning or value. You're just part of that unintelligible, meaningless universe. You have no value. You have no meaning. You're just a organism walking around seeking to satisfy whatever pops into your mind. There's no meaning. There's no value. We shouldn't even try to figure out the meaning of life because there is no meaning of life. We're just here. We're just humans on this earth bouncing around doing what we want to do. Life has no meaning, nothing to be achieved by life. And because there is no meaning to life, morality really doesn't exist. There is no such thing as morality in this idea of nihilism. Now, in our world, because this is an older philosophy from about the late 1800s, and truly this type of thinking has been around for probably since the beginning of mankind. As we see in Ecclesiastes, these ideas are there from thousands of years ago. But we have a kind of a movement in our world today that has taken these ideas and applied them, and that's what we call postmodernism. Postmodernism, if you've heard that term, is really applied nihilism, taking those nihilistic points and applying them, going from less of a philosophy, and now we're going to incorporate them into our ideology, incorporate those ideas into our worldview. So they say reality, that unintelligible universe, reality is really just a mental construct. The universe that you observe is not really a thing, it's really your observation of a thing, because you interact with the world through your five senses. So, I see this table here. The table is not really a table, it just is, but what I perceive is a table. I see the table, I can feel the table, I can feel the podium. These things in and of themselves do not exist, but my perceptions of them exist. Therefore, objective reality either doesn't exist or it cannot be objectively known. And because of that, language itself is fluid. The only reason we say that's a table is because we say it's a table. Outside of this thinking, we say, okay, well, we have a concept of a table, and this seems to match those characteristics of that word, table. But under postmodernism, we say the language itself is the thing, and so language becomes a very fluid thing, and words can mean what I want them to mean. If I decide that this is a table instead of that, then it can be a table, because that's what my perceptions of this are, and who are you to question my perceptions? You don't know how my senses are interpreting things. Knowledge and value systems are socially conditioned by cultural hierarchies to enforce power. Remember, there is no objective reality. There's no objective meaning. So anybody that comes and tells you that there is meaning, that there is value, they are trying to empower themselves over you in some way. So knowledge and value systems are inherently claims to power, and they are socially conditioned. The reason we think that's a table is because society itself has influenced us to think that that's a table, not because it is objectively is or is not a table. And so we come to something that crops up in a lot of sermons, and we can see where this idea comes from, that truth itself becomes relative, because knowledge itself is a social construct, so facts become relative. One is free to construct their own meaning out of life. If seeking the meaning of life is a vain effort, then you're free to just go come up with your own meaning, and that can be whatever you want it to be. And because of that, morality itself becomes a very relative thing. Who are you to question my morals that are based on my perception of truth, that are based on the fact that there is no grand overarching truth, that I make my own truth? However, oddly enough, there is actually one moral that comes up in postmodernism, is that power must be resisted. And so because all claims to morality are claims to power, power must be resisted. So the lack of morals and immoral behavior is praised, and morals themselves must never be asserted. It's not right to go tell somebody that they're doing wrong, because that's a claim to power over them. And who are you to do that? This type of postmodernism thinking has given rise to a couple of things we've seen since about the 60s, and they've become pretty big. They've given rise to deconstruction and post-structuralism. Now, a lot of times in the church we talk about deconstruction as someone leaving the faith. But it's actually kind of a subset of a larger movement where we take social constructs and we try to tease them apart to find where claims to objective truth have been made, but really that's just a claim to power. So in the church, we see people leaving their faith, and they look back on the things that happened in that church, and they start to tease apart all the things that happened within that congregation, and they say, well, really, that was just this person trying to control me. That was the peer pressure of this trying to make me do that, trying to control me in some way. And so that's what we see deconstruction happening within our world. And it's not just religious, it's happening with political systems, it's happening with just societal norms, right? People are taking things that should be given obvious manners of how we treat each other, teasing them all apart to try to find where in the middle it really is just somebody trying to control somebody else. Post-structuralism, where we say, okay, well, those social hierarchies, those social structures, we are now going to attempt to live without those existing in my life at all. Sometimes you hear people say the term that they are non-binary. That's what they're saying. It's a post-structuralism view, that I'm no longer going to live within this structure. I'm going to live outside of the structure. It's a very similar view to what the preacher in Ecclesiastes is putting forward. Because nothing means anything. You can make your own meaning. It's all vanity to pursue wisdom and knowledge and righteousness. It's a waste of time. And so people take that idea and they say, okay, well, we'll go make our own. And we're free to do so. Now, I said at the beginning this was Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and we showed some of the contradiction between them. So I want to look elsewhere in the scripture, because we know the narrator is wanting us to not be like the preacher, not to be like these ideas. So I want to look at some of these concepts, and let's figure out what the preacher missed. Where did he go wrong before he went down these roads? He misunderstood the source of the wisdom itself. Remember how we talked about all of his observations are based on what he sees happening in the world around him. And that world is a fallen, broken world. This is a place where wisdom reigns, but sin reigns as well. Bad stuff happens. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7 says it this way: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Not your own observations, not your own personal lived experience. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Ooh, our preacher, I guess, would qualify for that, wouldn't he? Because he hated life because of the vanity of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so be assured from what Proverbs says that if you attempt to find wisdom, to find true knowledge, and to find meaning in your life apart from the fear of the Lord, you're going to wind up like the preacher. You won't find it. And like the preacher, you'll be digging a well that you never find the bottom of. You will never find it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs mercifully goes into more detail about this and explains why. This isn't just a saying that you can tuck in your pocket. Proverbs gives us the reason why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. In Proverbs 8, this is once again that speech that is given by a lady, or wisdom that is personified as this lady, and she's giving this speech talking about herself. And one thing she says in verses 22 through 23 of Proverbs 8, the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago, I was set up at the first before the beginning of the earth. So at the very beginning of creation, before the earth itself was formed, before the universe was actually formed, wisdom, God's wisdom in his mind, he takes some of that wisdom, and it's almost as if he is able to copy and paste it out of his mind, in a sense, and embed it into this formless, this void creation that he will then fashion and form. And so wisdom itself is built into the very foundation of the earth. But notice where it comes from. It doesn't just come up out of the ground on its own. It started with God. Wisdom is his. It started there. How on earth are you going to find that if you don't begin with the fear of the Lord? You can't. You're grasping after wind, and you make the preacher right. She goes on to say in verses 30 and 31, then, now that he's formed the earth, then I was beside him like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. So in the speech, she talks about how when God formed the mountains, wisdom was there. When God formed the rivers, wisdom was there. Wisdom was embedded into all of these things. Not just some ethereal wisdom, but God's own wisdom embedded into these things. And because of that, God rejoices in that wisdom. That wisdom is embedded in everything. And wisdom itself delights in the children of man. That's the opposite of hating life, isn't it? When we have wisdom, when we partake in God's wisdom, there's delight from that. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19 says, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. So wisdom is not just something he embedded into everything. That is the method by which he created those things. So no wonder that it's embedded into it. It was one of the tools of his creation. So the preacher missed the source of wisdom. He based it off of his own observations, his own perceptions. And that's where he started to go wrong. The preacher missed the point that wisdom itself is clearly manifest. Remember how we talked about it's deep, very deep. No one can know it, even those who claim to. However, the scripture tells us that wisdom itself, this wisdom of God that has been embedded into creation, it's been clearly manifest. Colossians chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. That their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding and the knowledge of God's mystery, which is Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. You know, the preacher, he's sitting there and he's just scratching his head, confused, and he's lost and he's frustrated because he can't ever find the end of wisdom. He can't get to the bottom of that well. And he's lost and he's confused, but look what it says we can have. Full assurance. You can know that you've attained wisdom. You can know with full assurance that you've obtained understanding and knowledge. These are things you can have full assurance of. He says, in Christ. And the reason is because, we'll go into this more here in just a moment, that within Christ all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden. So all of God's wisdom is in Jesus. You want to know how an infinitely wise being would respond to a situation? Open up the Gospels and see how Jesus responds to a situation. That is the full wisdom of God embodied in Jesus. Colossians chapter 15. Paul here picks up a lot of the language from the wisdom literature, and some of this may start to ring true for you. You may recognize some of these concepts as we read from Proverbs chapter 8. Talking about Jesus, Colossians 15 through 20. He is the image of the invisible God. That means everything it means to be God, Jesus fulfills, right? All that fullness dwells in him. All of that wisdom that God had from the very beginning dwells in him. In fact, even the gospel writer John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So Paul here says he is the image of the invisible God. That elusive wisdom that we can't attain has been put in this earth in a very, very clear, definite form. He's there. You can see it. It's clear. It's not far off from you. Verse 16, for by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth. Wait, I thought Proverbs said by wisdom all things were created. Paul says that's talking about Christ. Because Christ has the wisdom of God in fullness. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So here we are reading Ecclesiastes, trying to figure out the purpose of life. What's the purpose of the universe? What's the purpose of our life? And we read Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And we see Ecclesiastes where he talks about it's vain, it's wisdom. But because Christ, with God's wisdom, was the agent of creation, notice what he says, all things were created through him and for him. Part of the reason we have a hard time understanding the purpose of things is because we're looking at what are the purpose of things related to me. Everything has a purpose, and it's God's purpose. It's his creation. How on earth are we going to find out the answer to that question if we don't turn to him for that question? It's his. It's for his purposes. You can't find that apart from God. The preacher missed the fact that death is not the end. You know, I got to say, if death was the end, I think the preacher would be right. If the wise and the fool both lie there together and that's the whole story, well, he's not wrong. But that's not the whole story. Death is not victorious. It's not the end. Going on in Colossians chapter 15, this is what Paul writes about Christ, the agent of creation, the fullness of God, the entirety of the wisdom of God incarnated into a person. He says, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. That grave opens up, and the wise, those in Christ, the wise, will come from it. Death is not the end of their story. If it was, they'd be fools to pursue wisdom, but it's not, so they are wise. By participating in Christ, who is God's wisdom, that in everything he might be preeminent. Death is not the end of the story for those in Christ. Wisdom will not be outweighed by folly. And you say, okay, now this one's a little harder, Dustin, because I've seen in my own life, and I have too. Man, I've done good, and then one bad thing ruins the whole thing. Oh, man. Wisdom will not be outweighed by folly. Look what he says in Colossians 15, verse 20. And through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his Christ. There's a day of reconciling coming. There's a day where God, as judge, takes all of the folly, and he takes all of the wisdom and all those cords that have been wrapped together in that IT guy's box, and he's going to sort them out. And yeah, you've done a lot of wise things in your life, and yeah, you've done some real stinkers. But God is going to sort those things out in the end. They'll be reconciled. It's all going to make sense in the end. And peace is the result of that. These are the things that the preacher missed. And it sure weighed his heart down. He didn't have a hope in life. He hated life, he said. He had vexation. He had sorrow. He had frustration. He had confusion. You don't have to have any of those things. By placing yourself within Christ, that body that he's the head of, the church, you can be in that. We don't have it up here today, but Galatians, or 1 Corinthians chapter 1 talks about the message of the cross, and that has become wisdom. It's folly to those who think that they're wise, but wisdom to everyone else. You can participate in the full wisdom of God by being a part of his body and by putting on Christ. And he's the firstborn from the dead. When you put on Christ and you participate in his wisdom, you participate in his resurrection. And death is not the end for you. And all of those things those foolish things you've done in your life will be reconciled. Because through his death, burial, and resurrection, you can be forgiven of those things. Those foolish things can be done away with. If you need to put him on in baptism today, you can do that. Maybe you feel like you've succumbed to some of these ideas. I'll be honest, a lot of days I feel like the preacher feels because things just don't seem to make sense. And, I think I'm a good person. I'm trying to do good, but why is life getting so tough? It doesn't feel like it should be this way. And it gets us down, and we get vexed, and we get sorrowful. It happens to all of us. If you need prayers of strength or restoration, we can help you with that today. The invitation is yours today. If you need to put on Christ, or if you need the prayers of the church, we ask that you come forward as we sing the song of invitation.